In the kingdom of Orra, where the rivers ran silver and the mountains held veins of copper that the whole continent envied, there lived a man named Edran Voss, the wealthiest merchant lord in all the eastern provinces. He was 32 years old, with broad shoulders, dark hair threaded with early gray at the temples, and eyes the color of deep amber. He was not unkind by nature, but years of wealth had made him careful in the way that only men who have been deceived can be. His father, Lord Voss, had died 3 winters past, leaving Edran the entirety of the Voss trading empire, 17 ships, for warehouses along the Orra coast, controlling stakes in 6 mines, and a ledger of debts owed to him by earls and minor kings alike. Edran had multiplied that inheritance twice over in 3 years through sharp deals and sharper instincts. But he was lonely, not in the way of men who have no one around them. Edran was surrounded always by people: advisors, merchants, servants, city nobles who laughed too loud at his jokes and agreed too quickly with his opinions. He was lonely in the way of men who are never truly seen. Every woman who had courted him, or allowed herself to be courted, had known exactly who he was before he spoke his first word to her. He had watched their eyes go to his ring, the Voss family crest, inlaid with a fragment of the eastern sapphire vein, before they ever looked at his face. He had been engaged once, 3 years ago, to Lady Serena Dalt, daughter of the Count of Meyerfall. She was beautiful, educated, sharp-tongued in a way he had admired. He had believed, for 8 months, that she loved him. Then he had overheard her, one evening in the garden of her father's estate, speaking to her cousin. "He is not what I would have chosen," she had said, her voice light and careless. "But the Voss fortune buys a great many things I do want. I shall be comfortable." He had called off the engagement the next morning. He had given no real explanation. He had smiled and been gracious and ridden away, and then he had not spoken of love or marriage for 3 years, until his oldest friend, a broad-faced, cheerful man named Bryn Asher, sat across from him in his study one rainy autumn evening and said, "Edran, you are becoming strange. You work 16 hours a day, you eat alone, you have turned down every invitation in the city for 6 months. You need a wife." "I need no such thing," said Edran, not looking up from his ledger. "The kind of wife," Bryn continued, undeterred, "who will love you as a man, not as a fortune." Edran looked up then. "That woman does not exist. Not in Orra, not anywhere that knows the name Voss." Bryn leaned back and folded his arms and let the silence sit between them for a long moment. Then he said, "Then go somewhere that doesn't." Edran was quiet. "Go somewhere no one knows you," Bryn said. "Dress like nobody. Call yourself something ordinary. Live like a commoner for a season and see who loves you for nothing." "That is," said Edran slowly, "possibly the most ridiculous idea you have ever had." "Possibly," agreed Bryn cheerfully. "Are you going to do it?" Edran looked back at his ledger. The numbers blurred slightly. He thought about Serena's voice in the garden. He thought about 16-hour days and dinners alone, and the way the city felt like a stage he was always performing on. "I'll need a convincing story," he said finally. "And plain clothes." Bryn grinned. "I know a tailor who owes me a considerable favor." 3 weeks later, a man named Edran Cole, a traveling scribe, modestly dressed in worn brown wool, carrying a battered leather satchel and a convincing letter of reference, arrived in the small border town of Ketthorn. Ketthorn sat at the edge of the Orra frontier, where the farmland gave way to the great mixed territories, the borderlands where humans, orcs, half-elves, and a dozen other peoples had lived side by side for generations, not always comfortably, but persistently. It was the kind of town that did not appear in the glossy accounts of kingdom life that lords read in their studies. It was muddy in autumn, loud on market days, smelled of livestock and bread and wood smoke, and was entirely, resolutely real. Edran had chosen it specifically because no one in Ketthorn would ever have reason to know the name Voss. He rented a room above a bakery for 4 copper coins a week, the smallest, plainest room he had ever occupied in his life, with a straw mattress and a window that rattled in the wind and a view of the alley behind the baker's yard. He sat on the edge of the mattress that first night and felt, to his considerable surprise, something almost like relief. Here, at least, no one wants anything from me yet. He had given himself 1 season, 12 weeks, to live as Edran Cole, traveling scribe, and to see what he found. Ketthorn had a population of perhaps 800 souls, and within a week, Edran Cole was known to most of them, which was the nature of small towns. He was hired quickly by the town's record-keeper, old Master Pelwick, a nearsighted man of 70 who needed someone to copy land deeds and correspondence in a clear hand. The pay was modest. The work was honest. Edran found, to his surprise, that he did not mind it. He ate his meals at the common table of the Tallow Dog, the town's only inn, owned by a weathered woman named Marta, who charged fair prices and tolerated no nonsense, and made a mutton stew that Edran, who had eaten at the finest tables in Orra, thought was genuinely one of the better things he had tasted. He observed. It was what he did best. The merchant's eye for reading people turned now to a different purpose. There were women in Ketthorn, and some of them were kind, and some of them showed interest in the quiet, reasonably attractive scribe who was new in town. There was Nella, the blacksmith's daughter, who had bright eyes and brought him apple pastries twice and laughed easily. There was Cora, the daughter of the town's largest farmer, who was serious and well-read and had opinions about crop rotation that Edran found surprisingly engaging. He liked them. He spent time with them. He was warm and honest and, for the first time in years, genuinely himself in conversation, stripped of the armor of wealth and status. But something was always slightly off. Nella, he noticed, watched him with a particular sort of calculation whenever the subject of his origins arose. She asked, with a carefully casual air, whether scribes in the capital earned well, whether he had family with property, whether he planned to return to the city. Her interest was real, he thought, but it was entangled with something else, a measuring quality he recognized too well. Cora was more straightforward about it. A man with a good hand and city education, she said one evening, matter-of-factly, could do well for himself if he made the right connections. My father knows the land assessor in the capital. She said it like an offer. Perhaps it was. Neither of them, he realized, loved him. They loved the idea of what he might represent. Stability, a path upward, a good match. That was natural. That was human. He could not blame them. But it was not what he was looking for. It was in his 4th week in Ketthorn that he met Orra. He almost didn't. The encounter was accidental, unglamorous, and introduced by him falling directly into a ditch. He had been cutting across the Northfield path on his way back from delivering documents to a farmstead outside town. It was dusk, the path was muddy from 2 days of rain, and he was reading a letter while walking, a habit his mother had always despaired of. He missed the edge of the drainage ditch entirely and went in sideways, landing in approximately 8 inches of cold muddy water and losing his satchel to the far bank. He sat in the ditch for a moment, wet and undignified, processing the situation. Then a large hand appeared in his peripheral vision. He looked up. Orra was tall, nearly a head taller than him, which was itself notable since Edran was not a short man. She was an orc, with the characteristic pale green-gray skin of the border territory orc clans, a broad jaw, dark eyes set under a heavy brow, and lower canines that curved slightly upward, modest tusks, not the exaggerated ones he'd seen in old illustrations, just enough to give her smile a particular, distinctive shape. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back practically from her face. She was wearing a canvas work apron over rough-spun clothes and carrying, in her other arm, a large basket of clay pots that she had apparently been transporting home from the market. She looked down at him in the ditch with an expression that was, he thought, trying very hard not to be amused. That section floods, she said. There's a marker post. Did you not see the marker post? I was reading, he said. Ah, she said. She extended her hand further, the one that wasn't holding the basket. Come on, then. She pulled him out of the ditch with the straightforward, unsentimental efficiency of someone who had pulled things out of ditches before. He weighed 14 stone, and she managed it without visible strain. She retrieved his satchel from the far bank with a long stick she apparently kept nearby for exactly this purpose. It happens more than you'd think, she said, and handed it back to him. Thank you, he said. He was wet to the waist, and covered in mud, and felt profoundly ridiculous. She looked him over in the fading light. You're the new scribe. Pelwick's new man. Edran Cole. Yes. Orra, she said. I fire pots. Kiln's just up the north track. She nodded in a direction. Then, practically, you'll want to get clean before the cold sets in. The tallow dog will have hot water if you ask Marta nicely. Right, he said. She picked up her basket of pots, nodded at him in a businesslike fashion, and walked away up the track. Edran stood on the path, dripping, watching her go. He could not have explained, then, why the encounter stayed with him. It was nothing remarkable. She had helped him out of a ditch. She had been practical about it, neither overly friendly nor cold. She had not looked at him with any particular interest or calculation. She had just helped him, handed him back his things, and gone about her business. He thought about it all the way back to his room above the bakery. He found a reason to walk past the pottery on his way to the North farmsteads a few days later. And then, because he was a man who rarely admitted when he was lying to himself, he acknowledged that it was not a reason at all, but simply that he wanted to. Orra's kiln was a well-maintained operation, set back from the track behind a low stone wall. The yard was orderly, shelves of drying pieces in various stages, stacked clay awaiting work, tools hung neatly. She was at the wheel when he passed, and she looked up without breaking her rhythm and said, "Cole," by way of acknowledgement, the way one says hello to a neighbor, nothing more. He stopped at the wall. "You do good work," he said, looking at the pieces on the shelves. He meant it. The forms were clean and practical, with an occasional detail, a carved border, a smooth spout, that suggested someone who thought about the thing they were making rather than simply producing quantity. She glanced up again, briefly. "It pays," she said. "Do you sell at the Ketthorn market?" "Every other week. And to 3 inns along the river road." He nodded. He was aware he was prolonging the conversation without particular reason. "I'll let you work," he said. "You can stay if you like," she said, without special invitation, just the same practical tone. "I don't mind company. Just don't touch the wet pieces." So he sat on the low wall and watched her work, and they talked. Or rather, she answered his questions briefly, and he talked more than he intended to, because she listened without performing listening, if that could be said. She did not do the thing people so often did of preparing their response while he was still speaking, or steering the conversation toward themselves. She just listened, and occasionally said something that was unexpectedly direct or quietly perceptive, and then went back to her work. He learned that she had come to Ketthorn 6 years ago from the border Orc settlement at Greyvale, 40 miles north, where her family still lived. She had learned pottery from her grandmother, who was, Orra said with a brief expression of complete love that crossed her face and vanished quickly, the best potter in 3 territories, and she knew it. She had set up on her own because she wanted to see if she could. She had been doing well enough. She did not ask him much about himself. Not in a pointed way, not rudely. She seemed simply to be the kind of person who did not pepper new acquaintances with questions. What she did ask was specific. "Do you like the work?" "The copying." He considered it honestly. "The work itself is fine. It's honest, and the results are concrete. You can see what you've done at the end of the day." "That's what I like about pots," she said, not looking up. "At the end, there is a thing. The thing either holds water, or it doesn't." He laughed, which seemed to slightly surprise her. "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." He came back to the pottery yard twice more that week, and then it became a thing he simply did. Stopped by in the late afternoon when his work for Pelwick was finished, sat on the wall, talked, or didn't talk. Orra seemed unbothered by this. She neither encouraged nor discouraged it. She was simply present, and it turned out that was its own considerable thing. He noticed, during this time, how Ketthorn treated her. Not cruelly, not all of it, not overtly. But there was a layer of distance, the kind built up over years of small slights and minor exclusions. Some townspeople were warm enough with her in a businesslike way. They liked her pots. They paid fair prices. They nodded to her on the street. But she was not invited to the social evenings at Marta's Inn. The other women in town did not stop to chat with her the way they did with each other. There was a farmer 2 streets over who crossed to the other side of the road when he saw her coming. And he did it so automatically that he probably didn't even notice himself doing it anymore. Orra, for her part, seemed to have arranged her life around this reality with characteristic practicality. She was neither embittered nor particularly wounded by it, or if she was, she kept it somewhere private. She had her kiln, her pots, her route to the River Road inns, occasional letters from family in Greyvale. She seemed to have made a kind of peace with the space the world allowed her. Edran found this, in some way he couldn't immediately name, both admirable and quietly heartbreaking. He also noticed, And this was the thing that kept returning to him in his small room above the bakery as he stared at the rattling window at night. That with him, she was different than she was with everyone else. Not dramatically, not effusively, just a degree more present. A fraction more willing to share an opinion, tell a small story, let her dry sense of humor surface. As if, with him, she was allowing a door to stay open that she usually kept shut. She had no idea who he was. She knew only Edran Voss, scribe, who fell into ditches and sat on her wall, and seemed genuinely interested in pottery. She did not look at him with assessment or calculation. She did not ask about his prospects or his family connections or his ambitions beyond Ketthorn. She just saw him. Edran, the man who was sitting on her wall. He had not felt that in a very long time. 8 weeks into his time in Ketthorn, there was a 2-day autumn harvest market, the biggest market of the year, drawing traders and visitors from a 15-mile radius. The town filled up, the tallow dog ran out of tables, and Marta hired 3 extra hands, and still looked perpetually harried. Orra had a stall. Edran came by it in the morning of the first market day and found her arranged behind her displayed wares. A good selection. He'd noticed she'd been producing extra pieces for 3 weeks prior. Talking to a prospective buyer from one of the river road towns with the calm, direct manner she brought to all transactions. She stated her prices clearly and did not apologize for them. And when the buyer tried to negotiate below fair value, she said politely that the price was the price, and if he wanted to visit again later she would be here. And then she turned to the next person. Edran had watched a lot of merchants in his life. She was a good one. He helped her for part of the day, not because she asked, but because he offered and she accepted without ceremony, pointing him at the task of wrapping sold pieces in straw and handing the bundles over. They worked alongside each other with a comfortable ease that Edran noticed, in a corner of his mind, had not been there with anyone else in a very long time. At midday she produced 2 portions of food she'd brought from home. "I don't leave the stall at midday," she explained simply, and handed him one without fanfare. They sat and ate and watched the market and did not talk much and did not need to. It was, he thought, a more companionable silence than most conversations. In the afternoon, a group of young men from one of the visiting farming towns passed the stall, and one of them said something, quietly enough that Edran almost didn't catch it, an ugly word, the kind that had followed Orra's kind for generations. Edran felt his jaw tighten immediately. He started to turn. Orra's hand appeared briefly on his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "They said. I heard what they said." Her voice was even. "It isn't the first time, and it won't be the last. And if you cause a scene at my market stall, it will be my stall that suffers the association, not them." She looked at him steadily. "So don't." He looked at her face. There was no distress in it. Or rather, whatever distress there was had been processed and set aside with the speed of long practice. There was only calm, and a slight warning to him to follow her lead. He turned back. He didn't say anything to the young man. He stayed at the stall. That evening, when the market day was winding down and the light was going orange over the rooftops, he said, "Does it ever make you angry? Living with that?" She was packing unsold pieces carefully into straw. She considered the question for a moment. "Yes," she said. "But anger is expensive. I spend it carefully." He thought about that for a long time. It was the following week, on a cold, clear afternoon with the first real frost of autumn making the grass crunch underfoot, that he told her something true. He had not meant to. They had been talking about, of all things, the nature of record-keeping, Pelwick's system versus the more modern approach he'd seen used in the capital, and she had asked, with genuine curiosity, how he knew about capital systems. "I've spent time in Orra City," he said. Then, before he quite chose to, more than a scribing background would usually suggest. She looked at him. Not sharply, not with sudden suspicion, just with attention. "You don't talk much about before," she said. "No. Something went wrong," she said. It was not a question, not prying, just an observation, offered quietly and left for him to do what he wanted with. He was quiet for a moment. The frost-stiff grass around the pottery yard was very still in the fading light. "I was deceived," he said finally, "by someone I trusted. About why they were with me." He stopped. It made it difficult to know what was real after. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a particular kind of loneliness." "Yes," he said. "It is." She returned to the pot she was trimming. He washed her hands. the careful movement of the tool along the base. When you were a child, she said after a while, did people ever like you without reason, before you had anything to offer? He blinked. What do you mean? There's usually a time, she said, before people know what you are or what you have, where they either like you or they don't. That liking is real. People get confused and think the later liking, for their success or status, is an upgrade. But it's actually a different thing entirely. He stared at her. Bryn, he said slowly. My oldest friend. We met at 12, before my father had the full fortune. He liked me then. See, she said simply. She didn't say anything more about it. He sat with it. The light was fully gone from the yard before he left. He had now been in Ketthorn for 11 weeks. He had 1 week remaining in the plan he and Bryn had made. He had stopped thinking of it as a plan. He walked to the pottery yard on a cold, overcast morning and found Orra loading a cart, the River Road delivery, the bi-weekly run to the inns. He helped without being asked, lifting the wrapped crates up while she secured them. I'll be back by evening, she said. I know. She paused, checking a rope. You're still here, she said. Yes. Your 12 weeks must be nearly up. She said it without emphasis. She was still looking at the rope. He went very still. My 12 weeks. You came to Ketthorn in early autumn, she said. Pelwick's contracts run in 12-week terms. A man with your capabilities, city education, clear hand, the kind of mind that asks good questions, doesn't usually take a 4-copper room above a bakery as a permanent arrangement. You came for a reason, and the reason has a time limit. She finally looked at him. I'm not asking what it is. I'm only saying, I'm aware. He felt the ground shift slightly under him. Have you always known, he said, that you're not exactly what you say you are? From about the 4th week. Her expression was not accusatory. It was simply honest. You hold yourself like a man who's accustomed to being listened to. You understand merchant transaction instinctively. I've watched you. You do the arithmetic before the other person is finished speaking. Your boots, even worn down, were very well made originally. A slight pause. Also, you told Nella Blackwood's father that the timber price fluctuations in the eastern provinces were tied to the Voss shipping contracts. A scribe from the capital wouldn't know that detail. A merchant would. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, except it felt too raw for that. You never said. It wasn't my business. She turned back to the rope. Whatever you came here to find, I hope you found it. The words landed strangely, gently, but with finality, like a door being held open and then prepared for closing. Orra, he said. My name is Edran Voss. The rope checking stopped. A moment of stillness. Voss, she said. The trading house. Yes. She turned around slowly. She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes for a long moment. All right, she said. That's all. All right. What would you like me to say? She seemed genuinely, mildly curious. I don't know, he admitted. Something. Anything. You're not angry. Why would I be angry? I lied about who I was. You didn't lie to hurt me, she said. And you've been honest about everything that mattered. What you think, what you feel, what you've been through. A brief pause. The name is smaller than I thought you were worried about. He stared at her. I came here, he said, because I needed to find out if anyone could care about me without knowing what I had. I needed to. I needed it to be real. She looked at him for another long moment. Something crossed her face, not the careful, guarded expression she usually wore, but something underneath it. Something more open. Edran Voss is a larger and more complicated thing than Edran Cole, she said slowly. I don't know what I would do with Edran Voss. I'm the same person, he said. The same person who sat on your wall and ate your lunch and almost cried when you told me about your grandmother's pottery. I know that, she said. But you're also someone with 17 ships and a family name that's known in 4 kingdoms. That's a different life from Ketthorn. Yes, he said. He took a breath. I would like to know if you would consider being part of a different life. The silence in the yard was very complete. The overcast sky was pale and still. Orra looked at him for what felt like a very long time. He could not quite read her expression. There was the familiar caution in it, the self-protective reserve of someone who had long learned not to hope too easily. But underneath that, he thought he could see something else. Something that had been quietly present for weeks, in the small door left open, in the degree more of herself she showed him than she showed anyone else. I am, she said carefully, A green-skinned orc potter from a border territory who is not invited to dinner parties in Ketthorn, let alone Oranmore. I'm aware. Your peers will have opinions. They frequently do. I have largely stopped caring. This isn't something to decide in a yard on a cold morning, she said. No, he agreed. But it's something to start in one. Another long silence. Then, in the same quiet, matter-of-fact tone she used for most things. I have a delivery to finish, she said. Come with me. We can talk on the road. He helped her onto the cart's bench. They drove out of Ketthorn together on the frost-hardened track, toward the river road, in the pale morning light. They talked for a long time on that road, the longest, most honest conversation Edran had had in years. Maybe ever. He told her the full story, Serena, the garden, the broken engagement, Bryn's idea, the 12 weeks. He held none of it back. She listened without interruption, asking 2 or 3 precise questions at the end. She told him, in return, things she had not told him before, about Grey Vale, about leaving, about the years of building something in a town that mostly tolerated her at a polite distance, about what it meant to be careful with hope because the cost of misplaced hope, for someone in her position, was so much higher than it was for others. If I come to Oranmore as Edran Voss's, whatever I would be, she said, watching the road. I am not an eccentric merchant's odd choice. I am a target. For every slight, every sneer, every person who wants to wound you through me. I know, he said. You know it as a fact, she said. I know it as an experience. That's different. You're right, he said. I don't know it the way you do. I can't. He paused. But I would be there. That is also different from being alone. She was quiet for a stretch of road. Your friend Bryn, she said finally. Is he the kind of man who would be decent? He would love you, Edran said, with simple certainty. He is the most genuinely decent person I know. Another stretch. And the business? The work? What about it? If I came, eventually, I'm not decorative. I would want to be useful. I understand materials, trade routes, quality assessment. I've been running a small business for 6 years. I'm not, she paused, choosing words. I'm not someone who sits and waits. He smiled, and felt something unlock in his chest. I know that, he said. I would not want you to be. The first inn on the river road appeared through the trees ahead. I'll think about it, she said. It was not a yes, but it was real. Everything she said was real. He had learned that about her. When Orra said she would think about something, she meant she would think about it seriously, fully, without flinching from the difficult parts. And when she arrived at an answer, it would be true. He could wait for a true answer. He had been waiting for truth for 3 years. Take the time you need, he said. She pulled the cart up to the inn's delivery entrance and looked at him sideways, with the slight curve at the corner of her mouth that he had come to think of as her version of a full smile. Help me unload the crates, she said. He jumped down from the cart and went to the back and began unwrapping the carefully straw-packed pots. They're well made, he said, turning one in his hands. Your grandmother taught you right. She always said, Orra replied, carrying a crate past him with easy strength, that a good pot doesn't need to announce itself. It just holds what it's given. He thought, not for the first time, that she was the wisest person he had met in a very long time. He set the pot down carefully and went to carry the next crate. Bryn Asher received a letter from Edran Voss in late autumn, 3 weeks after his 12-week term had expired. It was shorter than he'd expected, given the circumstances. The plan worked, it read. Not in the way I intended. She figured out who I was before I told her, and thought the name was less important than I did, and is currently considering whether she would like to be involved in the larger and more complicated life. I believe she will decide yes, because she is the most methodical person I have ever met, and she will arrive at the right answer eventually. Her pots are excellent, and she understands supply chains. Her grandmother sounds extraordinary. Come to Ketthorn. I want you to meet her before she decides, so that when she does decide, she already knows you're decent. I wasn't lying when I told her that about you. Bryn read this letter twice. Then he called for his horse and began packing for Ketthorn. In the pottery yard, on the first clear cold evening of winter, Orra sat at the finished wheel with a cup of tea and looked at the shelves of drying pieces in the lamplight. The ones that would go to the river road, the ones set aside for the next Ketthorn market, the experimental forms she was trying with a new clay body, the small pot in the corner that she had made and remade 3 times and still didn't know what to do with. She thought about the road, about a larger life, about the cost of hope and the cost of refusing it, about a man who had fallen into a ditch and accepted her hand without a moment's hesitation and come back to sit on her wall and listened. Outside, the frost was settling over the north fields, and the stars were very clear above Ketthorn. She picked up the small unfinished pot and set it carefully on the drying shelf. In the morning, she decided. She would have an answer in the morning.